The first scream came just after the champagne glasses rattled. One moment, Flight 472 glided smoothly over the Atlantic. The next, the cabin plunged into chaos, lights flickering, alarms blaring, and a violent shudder that sent laptops and glasses crashing to the floor. Passengers clutched their seats as oxygen masks dangled like lifeless puppets. In business class, a powerful CEO sneered at the struggling single dad beside her, still thinking him out of place until the captain's voice cracked over the intercom, carrying a rare edge of fear. "Ladies and gentlemen, if there is any fighter pilot on board, please come forward immediately." At that moment, every eye turned toward the man she had mocked, and a secret buried deep within him threatened to change everything. Terminal 4 thrummed with the late afternoon crush-rolling suitcases, clipped announcements, the scent of coffee and jet fuel mingling in the air, as Ethan Carter queued in the economy line with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, her unicorn-stickered backpack bumping lightly against his knee each time the crowd inched forward. He wore his best collared shirt and the same boots he used at the warehouse, laces darkened by years of oil and rain. Across his shoulder hung a patched duffel stuffed with snacks, a paperback for Grandma's hospital bedside, and Lily's bedtime bear. The trip wasn't luxury, it was duty. His mother's health had faltered, and tickets bought with discount miles had been the only way to get Lily across the country before the weekend. Lily craned on tiptoe to watch a wide-bodied jet lift into the gray sky, her curls bouncing, mouth forming a quiet wow. "We'll be on one just like that," Ethan said, soft with the easy gentleness he saved for her, even on days when his body ached from lifting crates and his eyes burned from 2 early mornings. Ahead, a velvet-roped lane to the left funneled business-class passengers toward a separate podium with brass stanchions and a tray of warm towels. To the right, the economy maze bent back on itself, a river of strollers and backpacks. A woman stepped into the priority lane with the comfortable authority of someone for whom lines never quite existed. Tailored charcoal coat, heels that clicked rather than clacked, and a pearl stud at each ear that caught the fluorescent light like a signature. Whispers rippled at the counter, Victoria Harrington. Ethan didn't place the name, but the way the gate agent straightened told the story. People who made markets move didn't usually fly coach. Victoria handed over a slim leather passport case with a detached smile and glanced around as if taking inventory. Her gaze halted on Ethan and Lily. It hovered on his scuffed boots, slid up to the frayed strap of the duffel, then found Lily's taped-up bear peeking from the backpack's zipper. A faint, amused breath left her. To the agent, "Just loud enough to travel," she said. "We're not vetting tickets for fit anymore. Business class used to be curated." The agent flushed. A hedge fund type behind her half laughed, then pretended to cough. A few eyes cut toward Ethan, then away. Lily's hand tightened around his, the way it did with shots at the clinic. Ethan felt heat rise along his neck, a reflex as old as the first foreman who had called him son, with a tone that meant the opposite. "Daddy, are we in the wrong line?" Lily whispered, cheeks pinking. He crouched to her height and nudged the bear's ear back into the pack. "We're in the right place," he said. "Anywhere we're together is the right place." He meant it. And yet the words were a small shield against the sting of being measured by leather and thread count. When boarding began, the priority chime sounded like a door closing. Victoria glided past the scanner, the gate beeping its clean approval, and disappeared down the jet bridge. Ethan balanced the duffel, Lily's child safety seat clipped to its strap, and they navigated row by row of elbows and overhead bins already crammed with roller bags. In business, a flight attendant offered champagne flutes with practiced grace. In economy, the same grace translated into a stack of plastic cups and a smile that said, "I see you even if the world doesn't." Ethan coaxed the seat into place, wrestled the buckle that always stuck, and turned the struggle into their private joke. "Operation Rocket Chair," he murmured. Lily giggled on cue, the small music of it smoothing the edge from the moment at the gate. He slid the duffel beneath the seat, tucked her bare under her arm, and clicked her belt with a satisfying snap. From their row, the gray curtain at the front of the cabin looked like a soft wall. Behind it, hot towels and champagne. Ahead of it, pretzels and patience. It wasn't envy that pressed against Ethan's ribs. He had made peace with the math of their life long ago. It was the speed with which some people assigned worth. He glanced at Lily and found her watching him, searching his face for a lesson. "Grandma's going to love your drawing," he said, tapping the spiral notebook protruding from her pack. "Maybe you can show her how you draw airplanes." Lily brightened. "With the clouds that look like sheep," she said, and began sketching invisible curls with her finger on the tray table. The aisle thrummed with boarding, a toddler's squeal, the thunk of an overstuffed roller meeting an unforgiving bin, a late passenger's breathless "sorry." The captain's voice floated on the speakers, firm, warm, practiced. "Welcome aboard Flight 472, cruising altitude, smooth air expected." Ethan settled back as the aircraft pushed from the gate, the muted shiver of hydraulics traveling through the floor into his boots. He exhaled, let his eyes close for a heartbeat, and felt the day's weight redistribute into something like gratitude. 2 seats together, a destination that mattered, a daughter whose trust was a compass. Still, the memory of the pearls and the comment threaded through him. He had not always been a man who swallowed words. Grief had made him quieter, fatherhood had made him deliberate. Above all, he would not let the world teach Lily that dignity was a perk one purchased. The engines wound up, a steady swell that filled the cabin, and the runway unfurled in blinking centerline lights beyond the window. Lily's fingers laced through his. The nose lifted, the ground loosened its hold, and the thin wall of gray fabric remained between 2 worlds, one that judged by surfaces, and one where a child's small hand could outweigh an entire airline of opinions. Neither Ethan nor Victoria could know that before wheels touched earth again, that curtain would mean nothing at all. For the first hour, Flight 472 settled into its rhythm. The engines hummed like a low lullaby, and the cabin took on that familiar mixture of sighs, clinking cups, and pages turning. Lily leaned against the window, tracing cloud shapes with her finger, while Ethan adjusted the flimsy blanket over her shoulders. He had promised her they would make it to Grandma's side in time, and he clung to that simple goal like a lifeline. Across the curtain, the faint clink of crystal glasses carried from first class. Somewhere in the quiet, Victoria Harrington dictated notes into her tablet, her tone clipped, as if deadlines could override altitude. Ethan tried to forget the sting of her earlier remark. But memory has a way of following you at 35,000 feet, pressing in like the thin air outside the fuselage. Then came the jolt. At first, a shiver of turbulence, the kind that made overhead bins rattle. But the second lurch threw a half-filled cup of soda into the aisle and drew startled cries. Oxygen masks trembled in their housings, ready to fall. Ethan instinctively threw an arm across Lily as she gasped. "Daddy?" she whispered, eyes wide. "It's all right, sweetheart," he murmured, though his own chest tightened. The pitch of the engines changed. He knew that sound. It wasn't turbulence. From the left side of the aircraft came a stuttering groan, then silence. Out the window, a blur of feathers streaked past. The acrid scent of burnt fuel began to creep through the cabin. Bird strike. Ethan's pulse quickened. A single engine flameout was survivable. But the shudder that followed told him it wasn't just one. The plane dipped sharply, screams rising as the overhead bins flung open, belongings spilling like confetti of panic. Flight attendants stumbled down the aisles, their practiced composure cracked into something raw. In the cockpit, Captain Henry Collins gripped the yoke, his eyes scanning a panel alive with red and amber warnings. Engine 1 dead, Engine 2 surging. Hydraulic pressure fluctuating wildly. To his right, First Officer Daniels groaned, his face gray. Minutes earlier he had mentioned stomach pain. Now he slumped forward, his breathing shallow. Collins shouted his name, shook him, but Daniels collapsed against his harness. In an instant, Collins was alone, facing a crippled jet in storming skies with 200 souls in the cabin. He triggered the intercom, voice tight with a tremor that even 25 years couldn't hide. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing a technical emergency. If there are any qualified pilots on board, civilian or military, please make yourself known to the crew immediately." The words sliced through the cabin. A hush fell, broken only by muffled sobs and the groan of the straining fuselage. Lily gripped her teddy bear, pressing her face into its fur. Victoria's champagne flute toppled, spilling across her tray. For the first time in years, her poise fractured, fear cutting through her carefully built armor. Passengers looked around, searching for a savior, but no one moved. Ethan sat frozen, the captain's plea reverberating in his chest. Fighter pilot. He had been one once. Hundreds of hours in an F-16 cockpit, combat sorties, emergency landings in hostile terrain. He knew the rhythm of failing hydraulics, the sick sound of engines gasping for life. But those days were buried with his wife, whose death in a training accident had driven him from the skies. He had promised Lily that he would never fly again, never risk the sky stealing her father too. For 3 years he had kept that vow. He looked at her now, eyes wet, clutching his sleeve. "Daddy, you promised," she whispered. "But maybe this time they really need you." Her voice broke him open. He saw his wife's face in Lily's, the same unwavering trust. The promise he had made wasn't to stay grounded, it was to keep her safe. And safety, at this moment, meant breaking every vow he had clung to. Ethan drew a slow breath, forcing his pulse to steady. He squeezed Lily's hand. "I'll come back to you," he said, low, fierce, a vow that burned deeper than the first. Then he rose. Gasps followed him as he unbuckled, the aisle swaying beneath his boots. A flight attendant, panic in her eyes, stepped into his path. "Sir, you must stay seated." "I'm a former fighter pilot," Ethan said, voice like stone. He pulled his worn leather wallet from his pocket, sliding out an ID card faded by years, but still unmistakable. The eagle and shield gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. Her eyes widened. Her trembling hands closed around it as if it were a lifeline. "Right this way," she whispered. Victoria watched from her seat, disbelief flooding her. The man she had dismissed as out of place in economy now strode toward the cockpit with the authority of someone born to command. Around him, passengers' gazes shifted from panic to fragile hope. Ethan did not look back. He carried only the memory of his wife, the trust in Lily's eyes, and the weight of 200 lives pressed against his shoulders. The cockpit was a storm of warning lights and alarms when Ethan entered. Captain Henry Collins wrestled with the yoke, sweat streaking down his temple, while the first officer lay slumped in his seat, breathing shallow, a mask of gray exhaustion. The acrid scent of overheated wiring stung Ethan's nose. For an instant, Collins glanced at him, disbelief flickering. "You're the fighter pilot?" Ethan slid into the jump seat and clipped in with practice speed. "F-16's multiple tours. I need 30 seconds to read your panel. Tell me what you've got." Collins wasted no time. "Number 1 engine's out. Number 2's running rough. We've lost partial hydraulics flaps and rudder response lagging. Navigation's compromised." Ethan's eyes moved across the displays, absorbing chaos into order. His hands brushed over the controls, muscle memory awakening. "Copy. I'll handle comms and systems. You keep flying. We'll keep her in the air." He grabbed the headset and switched frequencies. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday Flight 472, declaring emergency. Dual engine impairment, hydraulics unstable, first officer incapacitated. 200 souls on board. Request vectors to nearest suitable field." The reply crackled back, clipped Irish vowels thick with urgency. Flight 472, Shannon Airport is your best diversion, 90 minutes out. Weather, severe thunderstorms, crosswinds 15 knots. Emergency crews on standby. Advise fuel state. Ethan glanced at Collins. The captain's voice was taut but steady. 4 hours, give or take. Ethan relayed. Fuel endurance 4 hours. Commencing diversion to Shannon. He turned to Collins, tone sharp. We're flying manual through storm systems with one engine barely breathing. We need to start descent early or we risk total hydraulic failure. Collins nodded grimly. Your callouts, my hands. The plane shuddered as turbulence slammed into it. Passengers screamed in the cabin behind them. Ethan's voice cut through like a metronome. Airspeed 240 knots. Altitude 35,000. Begin descent. Collins eased the nose down. Descent initiated. The altimeter spun as clouds swallowed the cockpit view. Lightning slashed across the windshield, thunder rumbling through metal skin. The controls resisted, sluggish. Ethan's tone was crisp, military. Hydraulic pressure holding at 40%. Engine 2 temp in the yellow. Adjust 2 degrees left winds here alert. Collins gritted his teeth, obeying. The plane leveled, only to jolt again as a downdraft yanked them. Ethan braced with one hand, then snapped into the mic. Flight 472. Encountering severe turbulence. Request immediate vector correction. ATC. Maintain heading. You're aligned to Shannon approach. Expect heavy crosswinds. The runway appeared briefly through breaks in the storm. A string of lights shimmering in rain. Ethan's gut twisted. Gear down. Collins flipped the lever. Warning buzzers screamed. The hydraulics couldn't lock the landing gear fully. Main gear deployed. Nose gear uncertain. Ethan clenched his jaw. We'll attempt with what we've got. Prepare for belly scrape. He clicked to cabin. This is the cockpit. Brace positions. Secure loose items. Behind them, flight attendants shouted over the cries of passengers, their practiced voices cracking under strain. They aligned on final approach. Rain sheeted the windshield, crosswinds buffeting the wings. Ethan's callouts were steady, heartbeat-like. 1,000 feet. On glide slope. Speed 150 knots. Hydraulic pressure at 45. Wings 15 right. Collins echoed, his hand steadying the trembling yoke. 500 feet. Continue. Sparks of lightning flashed, illuminating their faces in ghostly light. Minimums, Ethan said, voice like iron. Runway in sight. Continue. The ground surged up. Tires screeched as the main gear hit. Bounced once, then slammed down. Sparks spat as the unstable nose gear collapsed, metal grinding across wet asphalt. The cabin roared with screams. Ethan's voice cut through. Reverse thrust engaged. Speed 120, holding centerline. Speed 90, 70. The plane shuddered, sparks trailing like fireworks, until finally, mercifully, it groaned to a halt at the runway's end. For a moment, silence hung, broken only by sobs and the hiss of rain. Collins leaned back, exhaling hard. He turned to Ethan, eyes wet. That was some of the finest flying I've ever seen. Ethan removed the headset, his hands shaking only now that it was over. I kept my promise. To her, he said, glancing toward the cabin where Lily waited. When the cockpit door opened, relief cascaded through the plane. Passengers cheered, some wept openly. Victoria's eyes locked on Ethan as he emerged, her world tilting. The man she had mocked for being out of place had just delivered them all back to Earth. For the first time in years, she had no words. The emergency landing of Flight 472 dominated headlines within hours. News crews swarmed the small Irish airport, their cameras catching blurred shots of passengers streaming down portable stairs in the rain. The story spread faster than Ethan could process. Single dad saves 200 lives. Clips of the burning sparks on the runway played on repeat, analysts marveling at the textbook handling by an unexpected co-pilot. Ethan Carter's name, once just a line on a discount ticket, became a trending search worldwide. Yet the man himself shrank from the spotlight. He carried Lily down the steps wrapped in a blanket, shielding her from cameras with his body, and walked straight past the microphones. He wasn't interested in being anyone's headline. He was just a father who wanted to get his daughter to her grandmother. For Victoria Harrington, the aftermath was far less forgiving. Several passengers had spoken freely to reporters about her remarks at the gate, the way she had ridiculed a man traveling alone with his daughter. Tabloids ran the story alongside unflattering freeze frames. Victoria's champagne spilling mid-crisis, her expression twisted with fear. Commentators labeled her arrogance emblematic of a culture that judged worth by surface. Hashtags trended, mocking her with cruel creativity. For a woman who had built an empire on control, the loss of narrative cut deeper than she could admit. She remained holed up in her hotel room the night after the landing, scrolling through feeds, each headline a mirror reflecting her own failures back at her. But guilt pressed heavier than humiliation. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan in the cockpit, steady and unyielding. She remembered the look in his daughter's eyes, trust and fear fused together. And she remembered her own words, sharp as glass, tossed carelessly at the gate. They echoed now in the silence of her suite, more piercing than the media frenzy. She thought of her brother, lost in a crash years earlier, and how she had let that grief sour into bitterness against anyone in uniform. Instead of healing, she had built armor of contempt. And now, the man she had mocked for the way his boots looked had saved her life. The next evening, she found herself outside a modest hotel where displaced passengers had been housed. Her heels clicked against wet pavement, a hollow echo. At the front desk, she asked softly for his room. A knock on the door later, Ethan opened it. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion. His duffel slumped in the corner. Behind him, Lily lay curled on the bed, asleep with her teddy bear tucked under her chin. Victoria faltered. For perhaps the first time in years, she didn't know how to speak. Finally she said, "I need to apologize." He didn't answer at first, but he stepped aside. She entered the small room, its plain furnishings stark against the glossy world she inhabited. She sat in a chair by the window, twisting her hands together. "At the gate I judged you," she said quietly. "I judged you because it's all I've known how to do, measure people by what they wear, what seat they sit in. But I was wrong." Her voice trembled. "I've carried bitterness too long. My brother died in a crash when I was young. I blamed pilots, planes, the entire system. It was easier than admitting how much it hurt. When I saw you with your daughter, I turned my anger into cruelty. And then you gave me back my life when I least deserved it." Ethan leaned against the dresser, arms folded. His eyes softened, but his voice remained even. "I'm sorry about your brother. Losing someone like that, it doesn't leave. I lost my wife in a military accident. That's why I left flying. That's why I promised Lily I'd never take to the sky again." He rubbed a hand over his face, weariness settling in. "But today, there was no choice. I broke my promise to keep her safe, and I'll live with that." Victoria met his gaze, her own eyes brimming. "Maybe keeping her safe wasn't breaking your promise. Maybe it was fulfilling it in the only way you could." The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. It was the silence of recognition, two people, strangers bound by tragedy, carrying ghosts too heavy for one set of shoulders. At last, Ethan looked toward Lily, sleeping peacefully. "I can't change what happened," he murmured. "But maybe I can start forgiving it." Victoria rose, smoothing her coat though her hands still shook. "You reminded me today that strength isn't money or power. It's love. And I saw that in you." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "I want to do something that matters with what I've been given, for your wife, for my brother, for Lily." When she left, Ethan stood for a long time in the quiet, staring at the closed door. The humiliation at the gate no longer mattered. The judgment of strangers no longer mattered. What remained was the look in Victoria's eyes, not superiority, not disdain, but the first flicker of humility. And something else, the possibility that healing could come, even at 35,000 feet. Weeks passed after Flight 472's emergency landing, but the echoes lingered. Ethan Carter returned home with Lily, trying to fold their lives back into quiet rhythms. He worked shifts at the warehouse again, walked Lily to school, read bedtime stories. The cameras eventually left his street, though headlines still referred to him as the single dad who saved 200 souls. For Ethan, none of that mattered. He only cared that Lily had slept through the night without nightmares, that her smile returned in the mornings when he flipped pancakes. He never asked for hero status. He had only wanted to keep his daughter safe. For Victoria Harrington, retreat wasn't possible. The world's scrutiny had forced her into reflection, but she found she didn't resist it this time. She stood before her board of directors, admitting she had been wrong, not only about a man at an airport, but about the values she had built her empire upon. It shocked them, but she pressed forward. Within weeks, she announced a foundation dedicated to supporting families of fallen pilots, civilian and military alike. She insisted it carry the name of Ethan's late wife, a woman she had never met, but whose sacrifice had shaped the man who saved them all. The Rachel Carter Foundation would fund scholarships for children like Lily, ensuring that courage left behind would not be forgotten. When Ethan received the invitation to the launch ceremony, he nearly declined. Crowds and speeches were never his comfort, but Lily begged to go, her eyes glowing. "Daddy, it's Mom's name," she whispered. He couldn't refuse that. They arrived at a converted hangar, its walls lined with photographs of pilots and families, its air heavy with remembrance. Victoria took the podium, not in pearls or designer red, but in a simple navy dress. She spoke not with corporate polish but with sincerity, acknowledging her mistakes, honoring those who had carried invisible burdens. "We are alive today because one man chose love over fear. This foundation is not about him, it's about the people who shaped him and those who will come after." When she called Ethan and Lily to the stage, the applause thundered. Ethan felt heat in his cheeks, wishing only to vanish. But when Lily stepped forward, clutching a scholarship certificate with her mother's name at the top, tears blurred his vision. She looked out at the audience and said in her small, steady voice, "My mom was brave and my dad is too. But what makes them brave isn't flying planes. It's love." The room hushed. Ethan's heart clenched as he pulled her close. For the first time in years, grief and pride braided into something he could carry without breaking. Later, after the ceremony ended and the press drifted away, Victoria joined them outside under the amber glow of hangar lights. Lily, bubbling with energy, tugged her sleeve. "We're having spaghetti night tomorrow. Daddy makes too much. You should come." Ethan started to object, but Victoria surprised him with a laugh that sounded unguarded. "I'd be honored," she said. That night, in their small kitchen, Victoria sat at their table. Lily chattered about airplanes made from French fries and sang songs off-key. When the plates were cleared, Victoria rolled up her sleeves and helped Ethan wash dishes. They moved quietly side by side, hands brushing now and then. It was ordinary, imperfect, and somehow extraordinary. Ethan glanced at her, seeing not the CEO who had mocked him, but a woman learning to live with open hands. Victoria looked back and found not just the man who had saved her life, but a father who taught her that love was the only wealth that mattered. And in Lily's laughter, both of them discovered something they hadn't known they were searching for, the beginning of a family, chosen and true. The story of Flight 472 would fade from headlines, archived as another crisis narrowly averted. But for Ethan, Lily, and Victoria, it became the start of something far more lasting. Healing had taken shape not in the cockpit or on the runway, but in the quiet spaces afterward at a dinner table, In a child's simple invitation, in the choice to see one another as more than surfaces. Heroes, Ethan realized, don't live in newspapers. They live in moments like this, where promises are kept, forgiveness is given, and love takes flight again. When the world remembers Flight 472, they may recall flashing headlines or a heroic landing in the storm. But for Ethan, Lily, and even Victoria, the true story wasn't about engines or emergencies. It was about love that refuses to break, promises kept in the darkest skies, and the way strangers can become family when walls come down. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they are single dads with worn jackets and daughters who believe in them. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to stay with us for more journeys of courage, healing, and second chances. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because somewhere out there, another story is waiting to stir the soul.